So, going open source. So as I said, in this talk, we're going to talk a little bit about open source and how to approach it, how to manage open source projects in general. We're also going to talk around a bit about other alternatives if you're not really ready to take the plunge on, open sourcing your work, but you still want to work in an open source kind of way. And then we're going to have a live coding session to create an open source library from scratch. And then we can have some discussions around the topics. And I would love for some feedback on this talk as well. That would be great. A little bit about me. I've done, work in JavaScript development since 2006, doing web pages for my various not so famous metal bands. But that's how it started, copy-paste driven development. And then I started studying Master of Science in Media Technology at the university, and then I got familiar with C, C++, and Python, and a little bit my horizon of the code, my view of coding grew. One thing, I'm just going to, every once in a while, perhaps go back and see a thumbs up from you that everything works great, or that you just say, that's great, Daniel, every once in a while, so I know that I haven't lost you. Okay, cool.
So far, it's looking great.
Okay, good. That's perfect. But during both sitting by yourself, doing web development, pushing stuff out to hopefully an audience, and to do more advanced coding at the university. Also, starting working with .NET web and API development at work. The target audience are always users of the product that you build, most often yourself, but if you build, a game in C++, people are not going to dive into the code and have a look at that. They're going to play the game. So that was like where I started developing, not in open source, very much closed source. And then my iOS journey started in 2011 when I started, my first shaky Bambi legs, trying out Xcode and doing Objective-C code, stuff like that. And a lot of things have happened since then. It's been a great journey, iOS journey. I started, focusing on iOS more and more over the years. And today I never do any .NET development, very little web development, and still a bunch of API stuff, but yeah. But the first public project that I did that was actually intended for people to use the code, like a library, was a tool that I built that was called Wigby. I was so happy about this acronym, Watch It Grow by Itself, and the COM address was also available, so very, very, very cool. I started doing this, and what it was a tool for active server pages that I later converted to PHP, where you could have your code generated. So you actually, if you go back and look at it, the whole concept was, something that grew. I looked at it as a garden. You created seeds in PHP, and you then planted it into this engine, and it generated code client-side. So you could execute the same code server-side as you could in JavaScript using a brand new technology called Ajax. It also had a Flash plugin, so I could have cool presentation pages for the systems that I built. It also had a built-in CMS. And as these words come out of my mouth now, I really hear my age. Flash and Ajax, a lot of things have happened. But it was a really fun project. I think for the time, it was a pretty competent project as well. And I got a bunch of learnings from this. So this was not open source. I intended to release it as a commercial product. It turned out to be a commercial failure, but the ambition was nevertheless there. But the big thing that was different with this project compared to my other projects was that I built it for public use, for developers to use it. And since this was PHP, and I couldn't, ship a pre-built binary, with PHP, you ship the source code, I had to look into a whole new set of things that I hadn't worked with before. So I had to look at code obfuscation, like how do I scramble this code so that people can't read the source code, but it still works. And since people can't look at the source code, they will need documentation. So I had to work with Doxygen and new tools, new tools to generate documentation from the source code, both PHP and JavaScript. And then when it came to like releasing it, I had to learn semantic versioning. How do you easily configure stuff so it doesn't break every time you want to change something internally? How do you plan releases? All of that. So it was a very rewarding project. But if we just, one thing that I absolutely took with me from this was the commercial failure of this project. And basically, like at the time, I worked at this consultant agency that traditionally had worked towards the Swedish defense. So, management consulting, defense industry, all that. And they just recently started doing software development. And they wanted to get a foot in the door into the, software market of Sweden. They didn't have, a bunch of experience. They didn't have a bunch of public projects. And they didn't have any products. So they wanted to acquire some products. And they approached me because word has it that you're working on a software product. I was like, yeah. Oh, that sounds cool. We're actually looking to acquire some software. Would you be interested in demonstrating this to the board of directors for a possible acquisition? No, it's not done yet, was my response. And, one thing that I learned about, of course, I didn't present it because the product wasn't done. It was fully functional. It did a bunch of stuff. It had Flash plugins and CMSs and all that. But to me, I was looking at, the faraway horizon, the end goal. And instead of, showing up at the meeting and talking about the current state, where do I see, what's the project roadmap, yada, yada, and, perhaps get investments or an acquisition and be able to work with it with a plan, like that didn't occur to me. To me, it was either done or not done. So that was a very, perhaps costly experience for me, but you learn a lot of stuff by building software intended for other people to use, so to say. But if we fast forward to the current state of today, a lot of things have happened since the mid-2000s. I mean, you've had Linux as open source, of course, for a long time. You have curl, a bunch of software. But now open source is more or less everywhere. You have platforms like GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket that makes it super simple to host your code and to share and distribute and collab on code. You have dependency managers like SPM, Gradle, and NPM that makes it super simple to just pull in a library into your project and you start using it right away. You have, the entire tool set is so well developed. You have Markdown that makes it super simple to write documentation. This presentation is actually written in Markdown as well, believe it or not. You have tools like Doxygen and Doxy to work with code documentation. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. You also if you want to go from open source to closed source in Swift, now with XC frameworks, it's super simple to just generate closed source software as well. So the today state of software development is a pretty nice place to be in, I would say. And this, just look at some of my open source projects, not to brag or promote, just to analyze. I want to go through a couple of projects that I currently have, because to me, the reason why I build open source is to solve a very specific problem, or a lot of different problems in one library. But it's to solve technical problems. And if I do it in a way that can be reused by other people, I think that's just amazing. And then I create an open source project and just push it out there. And I almost never do any other promotion than just writing about it on Twitter. So to me, it's very interesting to see how much usage the various projects get. So for instance, I have a UI library called Sheet. And let me just see if the navigation works good here. So if we look at this repository, This is a UIKit repository for presenting bottom sheets or custom action sheets that you can style for UIKit. And this was released a couple of years ago, and I got a push, like a promotional push on some website for it, and it's at 1.4 thousand stars. So that's, I think, pretty good for a project like this. Let me just see if I can go back to the presentation. Can I? I knew navigating away was a bad idea. Okay, cool. We're back. So 1.4 thousand stars for this one. And then I created a tool for SwiftUI called System Notification that mimics the iOS system notification that comes from top. Really tiny project. I think it's really, it does what it does, and it does it pretty good. And there we sit at 128 stars. So that's not a lot, but it's okay. If we then go to some other things, like when I work on apps, I create very general, extensions and concepts, like, for instance, how to work with, for instance, biometric authentication in an app. Then I just put those away in two libraries that I have called SwiftKit and SwiftUIKit. And SwiftUIKit contains a bunch of views and tools and stuff like that. Like, it has a lot inside. It has about 577 stars, about exactly, I would say. But then we go to the SwiftKit and look, and it has 33, which, like, to me, it makes no sense. And furthermore, if we go to the tool that I'm most happy about, it's a test tool called MockingKit. So if you write unit tests in Swift, mocking is really painful. And I found this library that I refined a little bit, and I created a library called MockingKit, and you can create dynamic mocks, and you can record what it automatically records, the calls it gets. I'm super happy about this. And it's at not even 40 stars. So I think it's very difficult to, try to think about this, like how many are going to use this library. To me, it makes no sense what makes it and what doesn't make it. Another fun project is an open source project that I have called KeyboardKit that actually made it possible for me to go freelance last year, because I got not that many people use it, but the ones who use it are actually willing to, pay for support and buy commercial licenses for the Pro extension. So that's pretty fun. You never know with the projects. They start to live the life of their own, and you can just hang around, join the ride, so to say. So that's a little bit about the project. I'm just going to go back and see a thumbs up from everyone in the audience. If you still hear me, cool. Great. So I have a bunch of open source projects, but I only really work on these projects when a couple of things happen. Like, for instance, I can use the libraries in my own apps, and I realize that something needs improvements or a new feature might be a good thing to develop. Then, it's driven by my own needs. I update a library that needs it. I also perhaps find a bug, and then I fix it. And also, like on GitHub, it's so amazing with user feedback. You get issues. You even get pull requests with people who actually fixes problems for you. You just push a button and you pull that code in. And also, once or twice a year, iOS and Swift update saying you perhaps need to go through the library to see that everything compiles. But most projects just lie there, do their thing until, I find a reason to update them. So it's pretty low effort overall. And the way that I approach these projects is when I start working on an application, I only keep app-specific code in the app target. So localized strings, specific app configurations, views that are specific to the apps. That's what I keep in the app target. And then I tend to create a framework within the same project that is called, the name of the app and then I add a kit or something like that to the end. So for my wallet application, Wally, I have a Wally kit. And in the framework, I put the business and domain logic and, app agnostic code. And that makes it gives me a really clean cut between the application and domain, which I really like. And then in the application, for instance, if you say that you have an enum or something like that with categories in the framework can't access the localized strings of the application. So then I extend the domain model in the app target with extensions there. Also, the framework is not allowed to have any external dependencies. So, for instance, if I write something that's gonna store data in a database, then I write a protocol that describes this database engine, and then I implement it perhaps with core data or realm. If I do it with core data, it's not an external dependency. It's built into the framework. So the core data implementation can live in the framework, but if I pull in realm or another database engine, that goes into the app target. And also in the framework, I unit test the code quite extensively because it's business and domain logic should be well tested. But the application is often more volatile and it tends to change a lot. So for my hobby projects, I don't really test the code in the app target as long as the domain logic is well tested. So that's like the way that I work with application development in general. And if I see something while I'm working on this that has a general value. So for instance, I created this application where you can swipe these cards to swipe between restaurants, like a Tinder app, but restaurants close by instead. And that, card deck engine is a very general one. So then I wanted to extract that into its own open source project. And the way that I do that is to first take the app specific framework that I have, or the framework within the app project, and I just take that out of the app project and I create a Swift package in another folder, and I put the code there. I see that everything works, and then I pull that package in as a local package, and that makes it. We're going to see some of the benefits with that later. And then when I have that working, perhaps I use the same package then in another card-based application. But then when I want to go open source, I convert the local package to open source by creating a new GitHub repo, cloning that, putting the packet in there, pushing it up, and then I start using the open source version. And when I do go the step to make it open source, I do all the all the stuff that you need to do. I start documenting the code. I automate build processes, stuff like that we're going to see in the live coding session later on. I also create code examples and demo, a small tiny demo app. So that's like the normal process for me to go open source for some specific piece of code. And if we look at these various steps, the good thing about app-specific frameworks is that you separate the domain and business logic from the app. To me, that's a big, big gain. Because instead of, if you have multiple targets in your application, for instance, a Mac app or an iOS app, a tvOS app, you can reuse the domain logic in an easy way than just, checking the boxes for the target membership for every file. So you get a nice framework that you can just pull into any target that you want. And to me, having a framework with business logic, it removes all of the app-specific stuff. So when I'm in the framework working, I'm less distracted than when I have everything in the app project. Also, the framework is faster to compile. It's generally easier to test the framework because you tend to have a different kind of approach when you write library software than when you write app software. But then, when you move over to local packages, what's good with that is that you get an even cleaner separation between the app and the library, because you can still, do linking within the project that is not possible when you go and make a Swift package. You also get great reusability across apps with packages. So for instance, if you have this card library that I call DeckKit, I can just pull it in an easy way with the package, which gives you increased modularity as well. You can combine packages. So for instance, one library that you have can have external dependencies that it pull in, and it can be an external dependency of another package. So that's really nice. And also, like, working on a package like this in a local way is a good preparation for open source, because you can do stuff that you do in the open source project, but you don't really have to go open source just yet. It's a good between step that I like to have. And then finally, when it comes to the open source step, to me, personal preferences there, to me, my code becomes better when I put it in an open source project, because it's going to be public. People are going to look at the code, and you don't want to like have shame ripping all through the source code. So to me, the code often becomes better, it becomes more generic, more configurable when I put it in open source, because it's intended to be configured probably. Also, you get to work on communication. Like if you have a private library, you know what it does. But when you make it open source, you need to explain what problem is this open source project aiming to solve? What does it do? How does it work? What are the APIs? You need to work on documentation and stuff like that. You practice your communication skills a lot. You also need to become at least good with planning, because when you go open source and if you do semantic versioning, you can't really change whatever you want whenever you want to. You need to plan what to release. When are you going to release it? How? You're going to have breaking changes. Are you going to deprecate code? It brings a whole new level of planning to the table. A big game for me is to be able to work with others. Like for KeyboardKit, I had so many amazing discussions. I started off with just, keyboard extensions is fun. And then, at the end of the second year, I have, so many discussions about like how do an harmonic keyboard look. It has 4 lines of code. How do this language work? What are the language variations between neighboring countries? You learn so much from working with others. And finally, I guess most of you are using open source. To me, it's amazing to be able to give back to the community. It sounds really like a noble thing, but I just think it's really fun to do so. But however fun open source is, it's not for everyone. For instance, if you're not willing to put time in, or if you don't have time, you shouldn't, release an open source library and, have put all this pressure on you. Like if you don't have time, you can wait. Also, if you actually write something, if you have a piece of intellectual property that you created that has some value of itself, think one extra step. Open source is not the only alternative to getting your code into the hand of developers. Then you should probably protect your source code in some way. Also, like if you work on a company that might not be secrets, like the secret sauce of the company, it can just be, we do this, or we have this kind of mechanisms when we list this kind of stuff in our app. It might be something that, the stakeholders might not be that interested in releasing. So if you're going to do open source within a company, I think that the proper approvals are really important to get. Also, if your software changes a lot, you can, wait until it stabilizes before open sourcing it. And even though you decide not to go open source, you can still work in an open source way, which I think is really nice. I have a bunch of libraries that I haven't open source that I use. And, having the same approach to working on those libraries, I think is really nice. Some alternatives to going open source is to create private projects. So what you do then is that you have a private server, for instance, a GitLab server, or a private repository on GitLab. And instead of using HTTPS to access that repository, you have to access it with SSH instead. This gives you granular access control to who can access your project. So when you pull like a Swift package from a private project, it's still going to be open source, but you really limit who can access this. And this is perfect if you have a company project. For instance, I really like to have open source projects within a company to get teams that don't really work together on a daily basis to have some kind of project that they can work on together to increase communications, like perhaps reuse login mechanisms that are the same within the company. You can also go closed source, which I've done in a few cases. Then you can have a public repository. You probably need a private repository for the source code, but the distribution repository can be public. And that contains just a pre-compiled binary, for instance, an XC framework if you work with Swift. And then the code is going to be, inside a built binary. And if you want to, you can just you can just distribute that as is. But if you want, you can even protect, your product with a license key and start to sell commercial licenses if you go closed source. And you can still use documentation and GitHub issues and all of that. You just protect your source code. And this is perfect for commercial projects. So for instance, on the KeyboardKit project, I have a KeyboardKit Pro, which is an extension that is commercial. And some good practices when you work with open source is to actually, even if your code is in a little bit of disarray when you have it private, when you make it public, think about the system design, think about access control, what should be public, what should be private, and only expose, the things in the library that has value. Because if you expose everything, it's going to be really difficult to change later. I tend to work with abstractions in Swift, that's protocols, and loose coupling. So instead of building your library on concrete types, instead build it on contracts, because that's going to make it so much easier and flexible to use. I tend to test my open source projects extensively because if you have unit tests in place, you can probably, hopefully, replicate if a user reports a bug. And then the test suite is going to be assuring you that the bug fix doesn't actually break other things. So unit tests are really important, in my opinion, as is automating. So I have automated the build process, as we're going to see when we build the package soon. But you can also automate how pull requests are managed so that it takes away the manual need of commenting on linting and stuff. You can just have automated processes that measure the code that is pulled in and gives automated responses to people who contribute to your repository, which makes it a little bit nicer. One final thing before we live code is that a license is very important. I learned recently that code without a license is not open source. If you put it on GitHub without a license, it's not open source. Code without license is, I don't know what it's called, but basically it's, all rights reserved. And if the author has the copyright to the code, he or she can go ahead and add a more restrictive license later. And if you are using that library, you are forced to comply to the new license. So when you do open source, make sure to pick a good license. MIT is a very common license. It's very allowing. It's basically do whatever you want with this piece of code. But you have a bunch of other licenses as well. It's a jungle, and you should probably look through a couple of them. I use MIT for almost all my projects. And to wrap this up, I hope that this was gave you some insight. Open source can be very rewarding. It can also be very demanding at times. It can be a second job. So if you haven't done it before, when you start open source, set clear expectations on yourself, and find within yourself what your ambitions and goals are with the project, and try to communicate your ambitions to people who use the source code. And remember to have fun, because it is very fun. And now I'm going to switch back and see if we have any questions before we continue. we have any discussions before we live code? Should we live code?
That was a very good breakdown of all the steps, and I think I particularly enjoy that you described different possibilities like closed source and open source, because I think most of the content out there is either focused on one side or the other. I think you gave a very good overview of both cases and when to do one or what to consider. So I think that's particularly good. Is anyone here?
Yeah, to me with the talk, I think it's hard to, should I start with what is open source? Then everyone, might be like, yeah, we know what open source is.
I didn't know that part about the license. I didn't know that part about the license, that if there's no license, then it's not open source. I actually thought, if the code is there, then it must be open source in GitHub in a public repo, for instance.
Yeah. So it's not. So I had a story from a friend here in Stockholm. They started using a software that didn't have the license. They used it internally within the company. And then the project was updated with, I don't know what kind of license it was, but I think it was GPL, which is, if you use that, you're really restricted in what you can do. So it really messed up the company structure. They had to basically stop using that library. And if, from when they pulled it in, if it had been MIT at the time, it wouldn't have been a problem.
A question about your libraries, because you explained that you focus on your stars to check if a library is trendy or not. Do you care about any other metrics to check how popular it is?
Actually, to me, sure, with the first product, the sheet, the product that has 1.4 thousand stars, is still in the open source world, that is not a lot. It's still, very manageable. To me, it would be amazing if I built something that was used by a lot of people, but at the same time, to me, if it works and if I use it myself and I'm using it, actually, the other thing that is important, and then that people who are using, for instance, with KeyboardKit is a little bit different because that's a commercial product, or at least part of it is commercial, where the pro license is actually, I had to work with how do I actually sell these licenses. So far, it's only with bank transfer. And then when people actually pay, it's not an insignificant amount of money to use it. Then to me, customer satisfaction becomes a metric that I didn't really have before. So I think it's case by case, project by project, but most of the time, if the product works in a good way, then I'm generally happy with it. I don't really chase stars and work a lot with promoting stuff and look for places where I can, put videos to promote the stuff further. So.
Yeah, I think the same, because I was putting more or less the same context in terms of App Store. If you publish an app, sometimes you care about the stars or the rates, and sometimes you don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I think personally for me, having so many projects tend to become a problem for me because, what should I promote? Sometimes it feels like I like having a lot of open source projects in the making because it helps me when I want to create stuff, and hopefully it helps others as well. But at the same time, if I had one open source project, I would probably give that, all the attention and all the care in the world. And now it's I work where I see a need, more like that. So I don't really have an answer for that, but.
Do you have many of your projects go a forked? Do you have any forks on your projects?
Faults, something.
No, forks. Forks?
Forks. Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, I think that actually, like, if we look at the KeyboardKit, it's almost 120 forks, and I think that's a little bit sometimes when, for instance, with KeyboardKit, it is open source, but there are a bunch of other commercial SDKs that charge a significant amount of money for their licenses that aims to solve the same kind of problem as KeyboardKit does. So, whenever I see a fork, it's like it's this code being used within that library now. Like, they can do it, of course, but I never know where my code goes.
Yeah, I think it can be, but sometimes I see Android apps where it's exactly the same as the open source one, and someone's monetizing it, and I just think that's really bad. They've had nothing to it at all. They just put some ads in, and that's it.
Yeah.
Just stealing. That's terrible.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I actually was considering open sourcing my various applications that I have, just building it for the public, like even the apps themselves. But I don't know if that's a good idea, actually. I think perhaps better to put out the reusable stuff that I do now, the UI components and stuff like that, and then leave the business and domain logic closed within the app. I don't know.
You can put things on F-Droid, of course, and the majority of people that go there are probably more open source minded.
Yeah.
Rather than the Android App Store where, it's just everyone goes there.
Yeah.
So do you find with the forks that do you look at the forks and then incorporate anything into your version, or what happens?
I don't look at the forks, but I look at all the pull requests that I get. And I think, it's so easy to put a star and not do anything. It's easy also to fork and not do anything. One thing that annoys me as an open source contributor is that when I do fork a project to fix a bug and to actually contribute, and the pull request is not even commented for months and months. So, for instance, since I build, I have to see how many. Let's say that I have around 20 open source projects, and in every open source project I have a test suite. And in every test suite, I use two libraries. One is called Quick, and one is called Nimble. And to me, they make unit testing so much easier because they remove the XC test syntax, which is just a pain. So instead, you get this behavior-driven way of writing unit tests. And they also have, so Quick is the unit test engine, and Nimble is the assertion engine. So with Nimble, you get really nice expressions. So you can say, expect this property to equal this property, or to be close to, or to eventually get this. You have a bunch of nice utilities that reads like plain good old English. And they are super slow at replying. There's like no real consortium around it. There's no person who you see has the exclusive ownership or that drives and plan. So, and in every project that I have that I've created now, I often make it multi-platform. So iOS, macOS, tvOS, and watchOS. And in the Nimble project, there's a bug that causes the WatchKit code to not compile, which means that since I use this, I can never verify that the code builds. I mean, the library builds, but the test suite doesn't build. And that actually extends to when you pull the library into your own application, because you're going to get source code. And if you build for watchOS, it's not going to compile. So I created this pull request with a really, really, really simple fix to this project. I pushed it up and I said, pretty urgent. If you do this, it's going to compile for the watchOS. And I know it's probably 2.5 months, and I haven't heard anything. And that's kind of one of the fears. If I were to create an open source project that got as many stars as Quick and Nimble, I wouldn't want to be that kind of maintainer who just didn't reply. It's one thing is like, yeah, thank you so much. It's probably not a good idea, but we're going to look at it. Then I know, not even a comment. I wouldn't want to be that maintainer.
Yeah, I think you also can get people who can be a bit abusive when they're in forums and things like that. Somehow you are their servant and you're going to provide all these things for them, and they're just not appreciative of what's been offered to them. Do you find that?
Not really, perhaps in some cases, but as I said, for the KeyboardKit project, it has been a super rewarding experience. And that's a project where you start off thinking that it's a super niche thing. Like the story behind that library was that an artist friend of mine, she is into goth metal, and she is an artist. So she has this really dark art on Instagram and a lot of followers. And she watched the Kim Kardashian iOS keyboard on the App Store, where Kardashian has Kim emojis, I think she calls them. And it's just pictures. You tap a picture and it's copied to the pasteboard, and then you tap the text field and you paste it in. Like, it's super simple. And so she wanted one of those, and like, yeah, sure. And I sat down, like, looking at how you build keyboard extensions, and I did it in UIKit. It was a horrible experience, but after, I think it took a couple of hours, I got the engine working, and then it was this big work of taking her artwork in various JPEGs, like it removing the background, like asset management took a lot of time. But then eventually I had this small keyboard, we released it, and it was like the first viral release of an app that I ever had, because I realized that niche is really good. So we released this app aimed at the goth community, which was really awkward. So like from releasing the application, it started trending. And I was sitting with dollar signs in my eyes looking at the sales, and like, oh my God, number 3 in utilities in the US, number 1 in Russia. This is I'm a millionaire now. I can quit my job. And then the next day it's like, okay, 40,000 Swedish kronor, like $4,000. Like, it's not bad, but it wasn't what I expected. But then that, doing that project led me into this new niche environment of keyboard extensions. So I started playing around with how can you mimic the system keyboard. And turns out that the native APIs that Apple provides are really, really limited and really lacking. There's a lot of bugs and nasty stuff involved. But so I started, creating a UIKit skin to create the system keyboard in English, but with configurable keys. And that was like creating a configurable system keyboard where you can skin and you use custom colors, custom keys inside the keyboard and stuff like that. That was just a fun challenge. Turns out that this wasn't such a niche project. You start to get, feedback from companies. The keyboard is actually the only place that you can have in all other apps. So it doesn't matter if you're in WhatsApp or in the Facebook app, the keyboard is always there. So for a company with a unique business value in, for instance, language or providing some other tools, the keyboard is a really attractive place to be. So that was actually the reason why I could go freelance, because I got to reach out for a couple of companies who wanted custom keyboards. And then it turns out there's a lot of countries that has really lacking experiences in the system keyboard. So for instance, Iceland, 300,000 people in Iceland, they don't even have autocomplete in the system keyboard. So then you start realizing that not only companies, the company that I work for now, they have word prediction, they have spell checking engines and stuff like that written that they can expose within the keyboard, which is great. But then also you have all of these people who have a possibility now to create keyboards in their own language and add value to it. So it's been a really like unexpected turn where I just wanted to solve a UI problem basically, and it turned out to be a linguistic dream project where I get to learn about, oh my God, look at the Georgian alphabet. That's really strange. Like, oh, look at this, right to left, up, up and down, side to side, and looking at how countries that are bordering each other, like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, it's like, the languages, the keyboard should be pretty similar, and then they're not. It's so interesting. And these are learnings that I never would have had if I didn't do open source. I would still think that the world orients around Swedish if I didn't do this project.
Do you know about this book from Ken Koshenda, Creative Selection?
No. Let me take a screenshot of this. What's it about?
I think you love it. Ken Koshenda was one of the engineers in the team that made the first iPhone. He was actually the responsible individual for the software keyword in the first iPhone, which back in the day people thought it wasn't going to work because the standard of the time was the BlackBerry with the hardware keyboards. And at some point, the whole project of the iPhone pivoted on that keyboard. And they couldn't make it work at the beginning, and it was kind of jeopardizing the whole project, but he solved it, and the rest is history, as we would say. And there's a lot of good stories about how to create great products in general, and how he solved the problem of the keyboard in particular. So if you are into keyboards, I think that would be a great story to look into.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's really one of these things you take for granted. You type on the keyboard, you swear damn autocorrect when you get, then looking at what the keyboard actually does, it's such a complex thing. And then, you start looking at it from an iPhone perspective. You flip it to landscape, like, oh, look, the input set changed, or the keyboard layout changed a bit. And then you take it to the iPad, and it's like, oh, the regular iPad with a home button. Well, the keys are a little bit bigger, I guess. Oh, you have swipe down gestures. And what happens if I turn this around? Oh, a lot of things, like you get additional keys here. Wait, I can split it in two and have it floating around. And then when you open it up on an iPad Pro, the keys are completely different.
Okay.
And then you start looking at other, like Arabic languages, for instance. You have, dotted circles where you can, like, I typed this character and now let me add this character. It's an amazing creation.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Very nice.
So in the live coding, I have a very small app project in Xcode with a small UI component that is not very general or configurable. And my thought was to take that component and convert it into an open source project. But I'm going to close a couple of projects here. I'm going to open up a project that I prepared that is called MalagaMobile. And this is an amazing application, a multi-platform application that works on both iOS and macOS. So this is written in SwiftUI, and basically what we have is a window with a content view. And inside the content view, we load a web view. This is not a component that exists in SwiftUI, but I'm just going to show you how it looks. Let me just increase the font size a little bit as well. So if we run this application on Mac, we're going to get this window. And we're going to get a screen, and it's going to embed the MalagaMobile meetup page. So this is, you already have your hybrid app ready. We can just release this on the App Store, right? And if we run this on iOS, let's do it on a
And it's
simulator.
not packing the Electron engine. So look at that.
It's already a big one.
It's already a big improvement.
On iPhone 13, if we load this in, let's see. It's always fun, like to know if it's loading or if it's broken. So here we get, the same. It's a web view. What can you expect, right? If we look at the implementation, this component doesn't exist in SwiftUI. And if we look at how it's done, I'm just going to, can you see the code well enough?
I can see it.
Cool. So what we have here is a little bit of code for iOS and a little bit of code for macOS. So we have to wrap a UI kit or an app kit view within SwiftUI to make this work. And in iOS, we're going to use something called UI view representable, which can wrap UI views. And on macOS, we are going to use an NSView representable, which is an app kit alternative to this one. And for iOS, this runs on both iOS means iOS and iPadOS. You could also do like OS, tvOS, for instance, if you would like to support tvOS. But in this case, it's not possible because what we are going to use is a WebKit web view. So this is the view. It exists on both iOS and macOS. It doesn't exist on tvOS and doesn't exist on watchOS. So we can only support it on these two platforms. And also what we do is that we create a URL here and we force and wrap it intentionally right now because of reasons later, reveal. And we just pull in the MalagaMobile URL and we load that request and we return a view, and this is basically it. But, as we said, WebView doesn't exist for SwiftUI, and this would be an amazing library. So my intention is to make this an open source component. What I first want to do, as I described previously, is to add a new target that is multi-platform. We can just do this. We can add a framework like this. And we can call it MalagaMobile Kit, like that. And we just embed it in the iOS application by default. Now we have this. And then if we look here, what we got is in frameworks, libraries, and embedded content, it just linked in this framework. And let's do the same for the macOS app. I know we said that it's a iOS library, but it only ways around it. So now we have this framework, we have something here. Note that I didn't, like for this demo, I didn't create any unit tests. There's really not much to test. But then what we can do now is to take the web view that we have and we pull it in here. And if we open the side panel, we're going to change the target membership, it's already done, to MalagaMobile Kit. So now the web view lives here. And in order to use it in the application now, what we have to do in order to access this is to import, then we can compile. But something is strange here. It can't find the web view. And this is a big difference. Like if I were to have this shared and have the web view inside here, and I can, check that it's going to be target like in the membership of both iOS and macOS, it's a really nasty way of doing it. And when you have a target membership, you don't really need to don't really need to think about making things public, because things are implicitly internal if you don't say private. So internal, anything in the rest of the package can use it. And by moving this web view now to a new framework, we break that implicit, the implicit internal. So now, actually, things are implicitly internal within this framework. which means that this can't be accessed. So what you can do to solve this is to make the web view public. And if we try to compile this now, you see that making it public actually puts other conditions on the functions and the members of the struct. So now we need to make these functions public as well. And if we switch over to Mac OS, of course, it's going to start complaining about the Mac OS code, that it has to be public as well, like that. This extension, though, is private because this is only used by the make UI view part. Let's stick to iOS for now. If we try to build it now, it still fails because the web view initializer is inaccessible due to internal protection level. The structs get implicit initializers. You don't really need to create one if you are in the same framework, but if you are in another framework, then you actually have to create a public initializer like this. And I mean, already our code is more prepared to be open sourced because now it actually works within a library. So if we now run the iOS version again, you can see that we should get the view. That's nice. So big win of just moving this to the web view. But now, since we are having an intention of making this open source, there are other things that we need to consider as well, because this is not really nice. If we were to put this out on the internet, people are gonna create apps that embeds the MalagaMobile meetup page. Perhaps we want to strive for something more. So what we can do is to, for instance, let users actually provide a URL like this. And then we have to store that somehow. Like that. Okay, I'm going ahead of things. So now we can provide a URL, and then instead of making this URL, we just load the provided URL. And now things fail because the content view doesn't know about this. So here we have different things that we can solve this. So for instance, we can move this crash prone force unwrap in here like this. And if we run, this is going to work. But also, what can be a nice thing is to, as I told you about, this is now the business logic or domain logic. And only the application target should contain app-specific code. And this is actually general. This is, you can use it with any URL. But it would be nice to not have to do this, perhaps. So for our case, what we could do inside the app project is to have, a internal extension of the URL that is, a static var MalagaMobile like this, and then have the URL being returned like this. Let me just remove the preview. And then what we can do now is to say MalagaMobile. And this is not going to work, of course, because this is an optional, and we actually require a URL just to be type safe. So what we can do here inside our code now, if let URL equals URL.MalagaMobile, then we inject that URL here. Otherwise, we just return the color orange to indicate that stuff are broken. And now we don't have any force unwraps, and everything works great, I would say. What you can also do now is to start thinking about the next step, because this was a nice way of just, moving this away from the app. The application doesn't know about how to implement this web view. which makes the application more focused. Also, the mobile kit only knows about the web view and doesn't know anything about the views or stuff that is inside the app project. So this is, of course, now it's such a small demo application, but if you grow the application to a bunch of code, this actually, in my opinion, makes a difference. But what I now want to do is to go ahead and move this out of the application and create a local package for reasons you will see. So for now, let's just create a new library called WebView, like this. Go into it and create Swift package in it. And if we look what we got from this in Finder, we got a git ignore, which I think should be populated with some nice presets like that. That's pretty nice. You also get a package definition file that describes the package. You get a README, and then a folder where you're supposed to put the source code, and a folder where you're supposed to put the unit tests. And these are all, you can have as many targets as you want in the package, as many products as well. But this is a very super simple library. And if we want to open and start working in this, we can just start doing it like this. And here you see how Xcode opens it up. So I want to start by, removing this. Let's keep the tests for now, just to be able to run it. And you can see that as soon as I removed the file, we got a crash. Now the package is invalid. So what I'm going to do now is to actually, let's see, I'm going to show this in the Finder instead. I'm going to drag this inside here. That actually moves the file from mobile kit to here. So I'm just going to remove it from here. Now the MalagaMobile kit is pretty limited in what it can do. So let's just assert that 1 equals 1 for now. And then we have this web view. And now we should even be able to, perhaps not on the Mac, let's run it on a simulator. Okay, it doesn't work yet. So here we see now that the library actually doesn't compile, because in a package you need to be more explicit about what framework, what platforms you support, dependence and stuff like that. But here you see that the code that actually worked inside our app project doesn't work here. It says that UI view representable is only available in iOS 13 or newer, and if we go here, see that it doesn't. So what we need to do here is to actually describe the platforms that we will support. So here I'm just going to copy the platforms from my other project, SwiftLint. And let's, so this is like my standard setup. For us, we are going to remove these two and have iOS 13 and Mac OS 11. And then we're going to, if you save, then it rebuilds and we can see that it now compiles. Great. So now we can go from iOS and compile, we can go to Mac and compile, and it should compile as well. So great. We can even go here. Of course, this is this is Xcode, so these warnings will probably be around until I clean the build folder, I guess. Clean build folder. And then if I build it now, all the warnings are gone. So this is great. So now we actually have a package. So what I'm going to do now is inside this package, let me just go up one step and commit this. Let me increase the font size for you as well. Add local package, like this. Oh, we don't have to push. So now if we go back here and we try to compile the application project, of course, it's going to say that it can't because the web view is gone. So where is the web view? Not here. So what we can then do is go to the project, go to the project here, to package dependencies, tap the plus and say that we want to add a local package. And then we just, select the web view folder that contains the package. We add it. And then we can just, for now, let's keep the mobile kit around, but we actually have to include perhaps I need to restart actually after adding, Xcode forces me to restart. Oh, sorry, it wasn't Xcode. It's so easy to blame Xcode when it's you. You can't have a local package and the project open at the same time. So I guess it's an Xcode problem after all. So now if we open this up, you can see that the local package is pulled in just like a source code, like an open source project. It is open source. But now if we go here to MalagaMobile, we can actually add web view dependency like this. A web view dependency like that. And if we just remove if we go in here to our content view and we now import web view like that, we should be able to run this application once again. Let's see if it loads as it should. Yeah, so it works. And since we actually define the platforms it supports, we should be able to run this on a Mac again. So you see, when you work with frameworks, you have to do a bunch of build setting configuration to make it multi-platform. It's a pain. So already by doing the local package thing, we actually improved things. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. And just remove the linking if I need to. I don't need to, and I don't need to. And now we should be able to run. Yeah, import. So now it works. So local packages wasn't really a thing until recently, but now, since they are, I think you should really look into that because it's such a great thing. And can you imagine it's so easy now to just, create all your business logic outside of the app project. You can still, if you want to change an implementation, you can still go here and work away and push and commit. So local packages are great. But now we have another thing that we want to do. We want to take this open source. And if you remember what I talked about during the presentation, there are a bunch of things that actually, should be in an open source project. So let me close this one for now. Let me go back to the web view package. One thing, for instance, is the README. And in my various projects, I, for instance, have a nice header that I pull in with information about the package, a logo to just, show, give the package some flair. Now let's skip that. Let's just call it web view. Then I usually just, add a little bit about web view does something. Let's fill this in later. I used to have some information about installation. So this is like my standard installation. Actually, for my latest projects, I don't bother with CocoaPods anymore. I just go with Swift Package Manager. So here it's going to be web view when we put it up. Perhaps some information about supported platforms. So in this case, it's these two. Don't need load. And then, for documentation is the next thing that I have. With doc.c, you can generate documentation for your package. Really nice. So if we, for instance, have a look at that SwiftUI project of mine, if I go to SwiftUI-Kit and I look at the README, I can actually, tap and go to a GitHub page that has the generated documentation modified for being hosted on the web. So this is just, amazing. Before this was possible, I had to generate the documentation, create a zip out of it, and host it for download. But now I can just have it online. And documentation is something that is really important. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So if I move this away, if we look at this class now, one thing is that we don't have any documentation. We can still go to, I think, product, build documentation, and generate documentation. And then you're going to have this window popping up. And you see that you actually have some kind of documentation generated, but this is really horrible from an open source point of view. So what you can do then is within your target, you can add a new file and say documentation catalog. I'm going to do it for iOS instead. And we call it the same name as the project or the package. And then you have, here, web view, a summary, web view does, we fill this out later. And then we have some topics. For instance, here we have views, and we have our web view, so it links. You can even, you should be able to tap and go in. Let me move this over here. Perhaps because the project is the same name as this, so let's not worry about it. If we generate documentation now, you can see that, oh, actually, this wasn't a good idea, and I haven't done this before. So isn't allowed, yeah. So this is actually a problem that I didn't perceive before doing this. If we just call this web presenter instead. Let's just do this for now. For now. You can fix this in a pull request later. If we do it like this, and we build, we actually link correctly. So I'm just going to figure this one out. And now if we build the documentation now, we are going to see presentation about the package, and you can actually look at some of the types. So if we look here in the SwiftUI documentation, you have a header, the header stuff, you describe the installation, support platforms a little bit like this, and then you get all the content of the library explained with deprecations and stuff wherever applicable. So this is really nice, I think. But in our case, let's just focus on not this documentation for now, but documenting the actual code. So if we look at the web view, it doesn't have an overview. The functions are not really described either. And the way that you can actually do this is by adding documentation like this, and just say, this view can be used to present any web URL in a web browser. Oh, that's the name. That's the name. I'm going to fix this later. It just really bothers me. If we generate this again, you see now that we have information about this type here. We can also say, for the initializer, we can also add documentation. So create a web view. And then we can describe the parameters, for instance. like this. And if we generate this again, you see that this function is now also described. So this is best if it directs to MalagaMobile. If we add more lines, and we generate the documentation again, you're going to see that this, the first line is added as a header here, and the rest of the text is added as overview. If you look at the root of this, you're only going to see the first line. So make this really expressive, but then, you know, add more information about how you use it later on. And here, if you tap in here, you see more information about this function. So this is a really small effort to make the code more approachable. Also, the URL is private, so we don't really need to document it. If you want, you know, no harm done, but you don't really need to do this. Well, this is nice, I think. Let's just do one more thing, because this web view now, if we look where it is, it's still in the MalagaMobile folder. What I want to do now is to convert this into an open source project. So what I'm going to do for now is to go to GitHub, and I'm going to say that I want a new repository called WebView. And for now, WebView lets you present the web pages in Swift UI. And let's start by making this private. We don't want to do anything, we just want to create an empty repository like this. Now, since this is private, I can't use HTTPS. I need to use SSH, which I already set up. So now, if I go here, I can just go to my open source folder and just git clone the web view. So now appears to have cloned an empty repository. Let's fix that, shall we? Let's just open up this, take all the content from here, drag it in there, close the previous thing, everything disappears. For the MalagaMobile, if we look here, we just removed it, all of the products. So let's just make this git move web view to separate, like that. And inside here now, if we go to web view, we can just add you can push this like that. And now, if we go back to the MalagaMobile project, wherever that was, did I close that? You're going to see some problems now because this local package doesn't exist anymore. So what I can do now is to go here into package dependencies. Well, it's not even there. Xcode removed it. So what I need to do is to remove this one, like that, and make sure that these doesn't link. They do. So let's remove this, delete, and let's remove that, delete. And now, if we go and reload this page, you can see that we actually have something up here. So it's not by any means done, but since this is a package and is public, and I actually have, you know, SSH access, I can go ahead. So like you see here, when I say installation with the Swift package manager, I have HTTPS. This doesn't work because it's a private repository. But for now, let me try to copy this and pull this in from GitHub instead. So this can be problematic. So Xcode and SSH can be tricky. For now, it seems like some software update made this not work. But in general, this is how I would do it. For now, not to block us any further, I can just go here to settings and say that I want to change the repository visibility and make it public. So now it's public, and we have a bunch of stuff that we can do to promote this. We can create social previews and stuff like that. But for now, let's just make it work. So now what I'm going to do is to actually take the URL described here and put that one in instead. And for now, since we don't have any versions, we have to go by branch. Let's just pull in the main branch and add it to the project MalagaMobile. And when we do, we can choose just one target. It's really strange. But let's just add it to the iOS as we did before. So now if we go here, you can see that we have the library linked here. And if we go to the Mac, we can also link it like that. And now the only thing that we have to do is to, instead of calling a web view, let's call it the web view instead. Sorry about that. And if we run the application now, it works. And now we are actually using an open source library instead of a local package, which is really nice, I say. Also, you can see that where it doesn't end up here with it as an open source here, it actually opens up here instead, not there, there. And you can expand, you can see the source code from the library, but you just can't change it because this is locked. But you can fork. You can fork the repository. You can clone it to your local file, and then you can add that fork as a local package if you want to, which is really handy. So, for instance, if to give you an idea, if I open up one of the open source projects, for instance, the SwiftUI and I open up the demo application here, you can see that it actually uses SwiftUI as a local package because it's so much easier to just work locally. But then every once in a while, it's good to remove this, pull in the real released one, and make sure that it works as well. So if we go back to the web view project, that's strange. Let's see, I don't know what happened here. Let me do it from here. There's something strange with this. Let me just restart Xcode here. We have the package, we have everything, so why doesn't this work? Why can't I open it with Xcode, I wonder? So now I'm in Xcode, I go to the open source, the web view, and I try to open it up, and it should open up. There's something broken here. I don't really know what it is. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, it's really strange. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. It has something to do with the renaming that you did from WebView to WebView View.
Yeah, but it's you know, a package is only source code. It doesn't have a project file or anything like that. So I'm actually a little bit curious if, you know, it's just Xcode in Xcode right now, and it confuses the WebView project. Oh, it was Xcode being Xcode. So restart, solve the problem. Okay.
That's a classic.
So now, what's that?
That's a classic.
Yeah, wonderful. So I have a bunch of other things, but now you see like the basic, you know, approach of going open source. You have documentation being added. One thing that I would like to add more is, for instance, if we take a look at this code, it looks nice, but if, for instance, some of you were to go in and make a commit and this line would be scrambled, or for instance, you start playing .NET Developer and putting this on the new line, I want to have some mechanism in place for protecting me against that, and for also my own incompetence, of course. So if we look at this thing, what we can do is run something called SwiftLint, which is linter. And you see that we actually have 9 violations in 3 files. We didn't even have any code. So what it starts complaining about is trailing white space violation. So by default, there are a bunch of things that I don't really agree with SwiftLint about. So what I have in general is, if we go to open source, I have a customized SwiftLint file, which with some disabling of the rules. So if we go in and look at it doesn't really show, but we can open it up in Xcode like this. And just, identify, let's just remove everything and add it as we see fit. So what I want to do is I want to link both the sources and the test folder. And for now, it's complaining about the trailing white space. So let's just, I don't really know why. So let's disable that and do another SwiftLint. And now we see there are no violations. So that's nice. Then anytime someone adds something, for instance, let's call this property U instead of URL, like that. If we were to lint this, we will get a violation that says that the variable should be between 3 and 40 characters long. That's, a default rule in SwiftLint. And for now, let's not touch upon this. If people start committing now, and I'm going to start creating new versions, I want to be able to protect myself against lint errors. But for now, I think that we're just going to add rules as we see them pop up. So this is linting in place. Nice. The final thing that I want to do now, first I want to just make a clean commit. Like that. And then let's look at how to automate, because now I think we're ready to make our first version of this amazing library. Not really, but let's create a 0.0.0.01 or something like that. So what I want to do then is to automate using fastlane, which I think is great. And to give you an idea, I have about the same setup in all my open source projects. So I'm going to walk you through what I have. First of all, if we look at the fastlane folder, I have an old shell script called build documentation that does a bunch of Xcode build stuff. This is not really needed now since they just released a new docc plugin that is amazing, but let's keep this around for now. Then in the fast file, you see that I'm adding a bunch of lanes that I can run, that I run during my test. So for instance, I add a lint lane that just do SwiftLint. So now from here I can just say fastlane lint, and it would run the same linting and work. I also have tests. So for instance, we actually added, tests to test that 1 equals 1, and we should be able to run and see that the test pass, hopefully. 1 equals 1 even now. Just takes a little bit of time the first time you test. But then, like when the test is up and running and you want to do, like, add more tests, perhaps test that 2 equals 1. The subsequent tests are much faster. And I actually think that the simulator at time is faster than running it on the Mac for some strange reason. So now we have, we can run this actually, fastlane test, and run the same test to make sure that the source code isn't broken. So the first time it does this, it prepares the package, but then you see we can unit test the package as well. Moving further, I have a couple of lanes to build documentation. So for instance, if I just run fastlane documentation like this, it's probably going to break because I'm having an incorrect target here. So every place where I have SwiftLint, I just want to change it to web view like this. So this is going to break. I'm going to do it again. So building documentation means calling this shell script, and this is actually wrong as well. Sorry about that. Let's just change this as well to web view. Run it again. So the documentation builds, and we probably, hopefully, now have a docs folder here with a doc.c archive. If we unzip this, we actually have something that we could put for download on the website. It doesn't contain much now, but this is an isolated, self-contained piece of value from our open source library. But now, since just a few days back, I think a better alternative is to actually generate web documentation. So we can do that by running the fastlane documentation web. And it does, I thought so. Let's see. Generate documentation. Oh, sorry, I need to actually install the documentation thing in the package. Good thing that I can get to show you this as well. So what you need to do if you want to use this plugin is to go into the package and add a dependency called Swift.c plugin. You add it to the dependency spot here, and you don't need to add it to any of the targets. It's just a utility thing. So you just add it here, you save, and you see that the dependencies are loaded here. And if everything works out, you should be good to go. Let's just see. Yeah, seems like we got version 1.0. And if we now run the documentation web thing, it actually seems to work. So build complete. It's not a massive documentation, so it shouldn't take too long. But now we actually have a folder here with a static site. We can do even more, actually. So if we go back to the fastlane thing, we have a documentation web preview. It actually, starts a server, a local server. So let's just do preview here. And if we run it again, we should get some information. It's probably because I already have an open server for my my presentation. But anyways, yeah, can't start the preview server. So just take my word for it. You can be, you could just go and have a look at the online documentation in a browser as well. So that's really cool. Then finally, we have some versioning. And what I do is I have this version script that does a bunch of stuff. So first, it ensures that I don't have anything not committed. So let's just commit everything we have. Let's see how much we have. So git add fastlane support like this. We can push it. And then another thing that isn't really true is that historically all my open source projects have main as master as the main branch, but this actually got the new convention. And then once it ensures that we are on the main branch, it does linting, testing, writing some documentation, generating documentation, and then it bumps the version to something that I described. And in order to bump a version, you actually need to have a version to bump from. And since this doesn't have a project file, it's actually a bit tricky. So what I usually do then is to have, if we look at SwiftLint, I actually have a pod spec for that one. I have a pod spec for even the projects that don't have CocoaPod support, because what I can then do is to add this, call this web view pod spec, and inside the pod spec file, I can just have this web view and specify a version like this. And I don't think I need anything else. But then fastlane has support for reading the version from a pod spec file. So now let's just say git add. Let's just go back to the project and say that we want to actually bump the web view pod spec. Add pod spec for versioning. Like that. And this is actually something interesting that actually you have to be careful with, because in my git ignore, I did not add docs as something to ignore. So you can see that all these files have been added to the Git repository, which is not really nice, because now imagine if we had a lot of code, the documentation can take up a lot of space. So what I want to do actually now is to go into say code git ignore like this, and I want to exclude docs altogether. But the mistake is already made. The code is inside the repository. So what I can do now, just to save us some shame, is to open up the web view and have a look at the history here. And this somewhere is where we added all this information, right? And you know, for users, update git ignore, this is not really valuable information. So what I can just do is to squash, like this, rebase children, and I squash git ignore onto the previous, like this. And then I can just say add support for fastlane, like this. And then now we rewrite history. And this is something that you can't really do when you have multiple people working in the same repository, because we now are the only developer, so we can do this. But rebasing is something that you normally just do in a feature branch. And now if we look, this new commit doesn't contain the the documentation stuff at all. So we can just go ahead and git push, force push like gods, like that. And now our history is actually pretty nice like this. So now let's just take this opportunity and create a first 0.0.1 version. The way we do that is to say fastlane version type patch. So you have patches, you have minor versions, you have major versions. Hopefully this will work. So now it runs everything, it checks that it's on the correct branch, it does linting, it generates documentation now, as you can see, and it pushes a 0.0.1. Actually, we have something here that fails, and if we see the failing thing is a pod trunk push. So actually, in my fastlane thing here, in the fast file, I actually have a pod trunk push for CocoaPods, which we don't support. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. Like that, push this one. And if we now go and have a look, we actually now have a tag. So now we have a version tag. It doesn't contain anything. And this is also something that is important. So when you do stuff in your repository, what I tend to do is to add a new file. I actually want to add new file. I don't want a Swift file. Let's just copy this one. add a release notes. So here we can say web view, and then what we have here is 0.0.1. This version adds a strangely named web view. We'll fix it later, like that. And then, you can, I usually annotate all my release notes with a bunch of emojis to make it more, if we look at the release notes for the SwiftUI kit, you see that I add categories for features and breaking changes and stuff like that. For now, let's not worry about it, but this is really a nice thing to have in your repository as well. And then I usually just take this code, create a release from the tag, copy the correct text, like this, publish it, and now it's an official release. So if we go here to releases, we see here. If you have some additional assets that you want to add, you can add it here. What I want to do now to wrap this up for now, because it takes longer than you imagine, I want to go back to the MalagaMobile presentation, and now go to the package dependencies, open this one up, and instead of having a branch, we can actually go use a version instead, with versioning rules up to next major, minor, range, or an exact version. For now, let's just push it to next major. Do it like this. The web view is updated to 0.1, and we have an open source project. Thank you so much for watching.
Yay! Wow, that was amazing. You were blazing through the whole process. I mean, really. Like a pro, eh? It looks like this is a very well-established flow for you now. It's so amazing. I think it's really impressive.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. It's all the steps in themselves are actually pretty basic, but getting it together to this whole thing, and it's just having the same workflow in every regarding removing cognitive load and distraction, like having all your open source libraries behave more or less the same way is a nice thing of not having to think about it. When you move to a new product that you haven't revisited in a long time, you just know how it works. The problem is when you have 20 open source projects and you want to add, for instance, now web documentation, then I have a day of doing the same thing in every library, which
I see.
It's not always that fun. But yeah, that was basically what I had. I'm gonna go and continue working on the web view. But if you want to do something, you can all go and create pull requests for this. And I'm gonna remove the 0.01 version when we have something working. And for a 0.1 version, it would be great if you would be contributors to this open.
Absolutely, yes.
And all. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually planning to let you do the pull request now and show how you merge, but I mean, time flies, so I think we should probably wrap it up.
And I think that relates to what Ale was saying before, that there are several metrics to kind of gauge the success, quote unquote, of an open source project, and one of them is the stars, but another one might be contributions, right? To have people contributing to your open source projects, and yeah, that's really cool.
I mean, it also depends on the project. If you just have a UI component that does one thing and does it great, there's probably not that much need for more features. Sometimes it also, one thing that I find hard is to draw the line between, we talk about app-specific stuff, and sometimes we have user-specific needs in an open source project. That's why I try to, when I see a need that is very explicit from a user, I would be able to do just this. Instead, I try to abstract that request and reason about what is the problem we're trying to solve. Perhaps it is styling this component in a way, and this user wants to be able to, set the font. Then it's probably a good idea to not just, add a font parameter to the initializer, but instead perhaps, getting back to the system design part of having an open source project, if you start adding, just parameters to the view initializer, it's gonna probably be out of control, because then another person comes in, oh, I would like to set the background color. Okay, background color. And then you start adding all of these parameters to the initializer and it's bloated, while instead you should probably, create some kind of styling in your microsystem
Yes, sir.
to make it more flexible.
All right.
Yeah, actually, first of all, the first one for the presentation was pretty fun for me. And I was about to ask what you are saying now about if you have an inner process on how to check what's app-specific code and what belongs to the library.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? I didn't...
If you have any insights on how to identify app-specific code from the library one.
Yeah.
Because
So-
that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so for me, like app-specific code is code that serves the application alone. So I have a pretty complex application that I'm working with now, where the customer has, my client has a bunch of utilities and libraries that they build themselves in C and different languages. And what I've done in the process, because what they wanted was a custom keyboard with word prediction and text-to-speech. What I ended up doing was a library, a framework that is the engine for prediction. So it wraps the C library in Swift code. It exposes models that makes it really easy to work with it in Swift. And then they can just pull in the package, the prediction kit package, and start using it in any app. So that is, app agnostic. It works, it's prediction specific and app agnostic. It can be used in any app. So now when I created this, we started with that in the keyboard extension, but then I created this iOS and iPadOS text editor that also needs text-to-speech. And I can just pull the same package in and use the same, settings, all that. I had, language pickers and all that in that package that I can use both in the keyboard extension and the iOS app. And now I create a Mac app, and it can use the same functionality from that as well. And they all work the same way. So that's like a very domain-specific thing, right? But then I have a bunch of these, libraries for validating licenses, for communicating with the App Store. And for instance, the App Store package has the services and the description, like an abstraction of the App Store product, the StoreKit product. So I have something called an app product, store product, which is a protocol. And then inside the application, I can define app-specific product. But then, since they implement the protocol of the store product, I can use these app-specific products with the app-agnostic engine, because it's designed by contract, basically. So, but then, for a long explanation, in the application itself, I have a framework with app-agnostic code. And to me, like, the app-specific code can be similar and even identical in two app targets. You can have the same piece of code that is app-specific, but perhaps resolves to different functionalities, especially in UIKit, where you have perhaps one piece of logic for UIKit, or for SwiftWire, sorry, one specific piece of logic for UIKit and one for AppKit. But to make it simple, I think that app-specific code can be changed whenever to serve the need of the app, while domain and business logic should be absolute to the business needs. That is my definition of it. So I would never add something to a framework that is specific to the app. And stuff that is app-specific are configurations, for instance, info plist file, localized strings, use, You can also have, perhaps a protocol or a contract that you implement specifically for the application, depending on the external dependencies that the app has.
I guess it makes sense.
Long answer.
No, but it was nice.
Nice.
Very nice. Hey, thanks a
Cool.
lot. That took you a little bit over time. I'm totally fine with it, but I think we can wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for the effort and the great presentation.
Thank you for sticking around for an entire talk.
It's been amazing. Yes.
Yeah, really nice meeting you. And I would love for you to contribute to this. Let's make it the MalagaMobile.
Will do.
official.
Let's make that
just
contribution.
have a look. I will have a look at how you come around. The type having the same name as the package. That was something that I didn't predict, because now we have the WebKit package, WebView package, and the WebView struct. So something is right there. I think it's only a problem with the documentation actually, but I'm just gonna dig into it.
Very cool. Hey,
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.